I want to talk about just two kind of ways that I see American education going. There seem to be two conflicting trends, and they have various labels. But I want to talk about that in the context of federalism and the history of American education. When I kind of talk about both of them, I'm hoping that you kind of look at the ideas through this lens. What is the arrangement, what is the structure that is most likely to encourage, to foster, and to respond to or be supple within self-government? And what kind of structure? This is the thing I have been thinking of a lot because, when I'm having all these discussions with people about education and Common Core, we have these debates about, school choice, charter schools, so forth. Are those more corporate collusion and so on and so forth? So that is a difficult thing to wrestle with for me, and I have been trying to think about it. What is the structure that most promotes the right and the ability of families and local communities to govern themselves, which is a fundamental American right? So we're going to talk about two ways of kind of structuring American education. There have been two tracks that have been happening in American education for basically our history. And the first one I have kind of labeled well, actually, they're both two ways of achieving the same end that everyone says that they want, called accountability. And so the first one is kind of a top-down one that is, I think, manifested by the way that testing now has morphed from more of a diagnostic that assists schools in order to be a lever that connects to all these different various policies that people from thousands of miles away, are yielding without any knowledge of the children in the classrooms. You can tell which side I am. I'm on already. So the first one's kind of, I think, manifested by that, the government version of accountability, where tests play a central role because they don't have any people actually looking at the children in the classrooms. And the other version is parental choice, the bottom-up individual empowerment that you get through what we call local control. Well, local control is a weasel phrase, and so I will kind of talk about defining that as well. There are different definitions that people have for what it means. So I was actually watching, while I was packing my big giant bag of pregnancy snacks yesterday, I was listening to an interview of Thomas Sowell, the famous economist, writer, and he was talking about his new book that is all, I think it's called Intellectuals and Race. And one thing that he mentioned was that testing, we like to think, progressives really further this notion that you can be objective, you can give, you can have independent analyses by outside experts and instruments that give you objective data, and you just have to follow the data where it leads without any foundational principles influencing it and so forth, which of course become their foundational principles, which leads us all into the mess that we have today. But Dr. Sowell was talking about how tests in the early progressive era, the reason that liberals were racist was because the tests, they believe, showed them that people of different races, and particularly black people, were cognitively deficient. So they just believed, well, it's a genetic thing, if people of different races cannot function very well. And of course, subsequent tests disproved that and showed that there was a lot of different influence, a lot of different reasons. So for example, the poor children in England, white children, would perform at the same level as black children in America. So that's, Sowell was saying, an obvious indicator that it's not just race, it's not genetics. But it took many years and many decades to kind of make that obvious and to force that through the academy. So that kind of gave me a thought about how you think that these objective measures are independent. They tell you the truth, but they don't necessarily tell you the truth. They're just a tool. And so you have to have that philosophy, that goal that is guiding where you're going to use these tools, how you're going to use them. And that has to be the thing that people realize. So I get frustrated when people talk about how education is supposed to be nonpartisan. Our school boards, we don't elect them according to partisan lines and so forth. And I'm not really keen on the political parties that we have, but I do think that they reveal generally a different philosophy that different people have about governing, and that I would hope you would bring that into, and you do even if you say that you don't, bring that into governing education at a local school board level, a state school board level, and so forth. So let's talk about just those different philosophies in education. And the first one I'm going to talk about, of course, is top-down, that we have been seeing more and more and more decrease of empowerment for individuals and an increase of empowerment for bureaucrats and government folks. So the first thing I wanted to discuss is, first of all, how the top-down approach empowers bureaucracy, and the reason that if we don't get rid of this structure or change the structure that gave us Common Core, we're only going to have Common Core 2.0 if we stamp out this thing that most of us are concerned about and standing against. So let me talk about a couple of manifestations of top-down government-style accountability. And so those include no-bid government contracts or kind of closed-down contracts. So for example, a big one is with testing companies, or a lot of times local school boards, they'll contract out for services, and I have no problem with contracting out for services. That's great. You get what you want at a lower price, but there's a difference between, a state agreeing without any public review or without releasing the contracts beforehand or without bidding out these different services and including provisions such as data protections for children in the contract, as opposed to just saying, sure, we'll take carte blanche, whatever your organization decides to give to us. Oh yes, and our children can be test subjects for all these new tests that you're developing without any pay or notice to parents, and so on and so forth. And basically, we have come to a point in American education where people have basically a choice of a progressive education system or a more progressive education system. So, people always talk about, oh, if you don't like the school system, we'll move. Well, the school system won over might have slightly better test scores, but the kids are still learning, hands-on craft projects in school rather than ever having learned a bit about grammar or so on and so forth. And they just get better test scores maybe because, their parents earn more money and they read to them at home. That's not really an improvement to my mind. And so what basically, let's see, I'm looking at my notes here. I'm going to rearrange them in my mind. American education has basically gotten so extremely progressive, I think, just because progressives targeted education. So the whole system from the beginning to end is controlled by cartels, by monopolists, as I'm pretty sure that Bill can explain in great detail. So for example, think of just one thing that is an example that always comes to mind: teacher certification. So the research on this shows that whether a teacher is certified, takes the ed classes at ed school, passes the test and so forth, there basically makes no difference to teacher quality whether she has a certificate or not. So basically what the certificate becomes is a way for education schools to get more money from their useless classes that impose on teachers, really impose on teachers a certain way of thinking about the classroom that is progressive-minded. It is those useless hands-on projects. It is the absence of actual thought, and so on and so forth. And so even if a person enters an education school wanting to learn something to teach a child, they will be denied that opportunity and told that the best way to teach a child, even though research disproves this, is to actually teach them nothing but help them have a fun time doing it. If you have every single teacher has to go through that kind of system in order to enter a classroom, what do you think, is happening to all the classrooms in the country? In many states, private school teachers have to be state certified. So there's this state mandate, this state cartel essentially set up to close in all the teachers to all teach the same thing, so that even if you think you have a choice by moving schools or going to a private school, there's not much of a choice at all because the progressive way of thinking has co-opted the education system. So here's another way. I'll talk about that in context of the Common Core testing contracts, which I know Jane will get into a lot more with the problems with the privacy and so forth embedded in them. But I see the testing contracts between states and the Common Core organizations as basically the worst thing about Common Core. And that is because well, first of all, they're trying out experimental tests on children. The way, as Bill mentioned, Linda Darling-Hammond, the folks involved with Common Core tests, they want to have more open-ended subjective exams that tend, as far as we know from our experience with these, they are not as reliable, and they introduce, a lot of subjectivity into the test. Well, I would rather have my child, telling about whether, demonstrating that he can multiply, rather than, explaining a story, telling a story about multiplication and seeing how creative he can be in that. I mean, so not only that, for the Common Core test that came out of New York this spring, for example, they penalized children for getting the right answer with the wrong method. So if we're talking about Common Core having, supposed to be, you have freedom within the classroom, you can get to the goals of Common Core whatever way you want, but that test comes in with the ratchet and says, oh, but if you didn't teach this method, look, all your kids are going to score, they can't get the multiplication problem right, even though they know how to multiply. That's an obvious problem. But the real problem with the testing core contract, or Common Core testing contracts, is that they give the power over testing, and now testing controls so many things about, whether schools will get funding. In Indiana, are the state grades, teacher evaluations. So teachers, if they get a bad evaluation for 2-3 years in a row, they can be fired. And I mean, I'm all for firing bad teachers, but the context under which you do that is extremely important. So firing a teacher who doesn't follow the party line is a lot more problematic to me than firing a teacher who will not teach a child the things that he needs to know for that grade. So what that basically does is you're handing the keys to education, the keys that a bunch of folks have created for this external accountability rather than internal accountability. You're handing the key of that over to outside organizations who get to turn it into essentially whatever they want. They can change the test to push the sort of teaching that they want to be occurring in schools. So even teachers who in the past, you've heard this probably if you talk to a teacher, oh, I've just closed, I closed my door and I ignore them, it's another fad, I've seen 5 of them in the past 20 years. Well, if the fad is following you around in your classroom with a clipboard, you can't shut the door. So basically, in my mind, what the Common Core tests beyond the whole sovereignty problems with them, and that the contract requires the state to let the Common Core testing organizations decide what state policies they will have in regards to testing. So they literally commit the state legislature to changing laws, policies, and regulations regarding testing according to what the Common Core testing groups demand. That's kind of a problem for me. I can't say to my legislature, look, we don't like this policy. Oh, I'm sorry, we have this contract that says we have to have this policy. Excuse me, who do you work for again? Okay. So the last thing that I wanted to mention about thinking about top-down accountability in terms of accountability to whoever basically gets to be in charge calling the shots through the tests is the most recent round of No Child Left Behind waivers. In fact, President Obama's education team just announced that they're going to hand out to states their last extension of No Child Left Behind. So that means that was another way by which Common Core entered the states. And to get this waiver of No Child Left Behind, states have to commit once more to Common Core. But not only this, they have to commit to using the results from teacher evaluations to redistribute the good teachers across school districts in the state. I'm not kidding. Literally, if you're a principal and you identify certain teachers as good, you have to present the federal government with the plan of how you will make sure that no school district has more percentages of the rated good teachers than other school districts. Yes, that's pretty much the reaction I had too. I thought, they can't be serious. Oh, they're serious. It's right in there. And we see this is obviously an infringement on state autonomy. Take the federal government, oh, we'll give you this thing we want if you redistribute all your teachers, if you adopt these national tests, and so on and so forth. But you can see that actually does influence states. So Indiana just came out with its fiscal analysis of implementing Common Core. One of the things that they say in there is, we might lose our federal funding if we get rid of Common Core. Now, the federal government and President Arne Duncan, heaven save us, Arne Duncan. So Education Secretary Arne Duncan has been running around. Just 2 weeks ago, he told another set of newspaper reporters, don't believe all the crazy Common Core people, the federal government is not involved. Well, someone in Indiana's Legislative Audit Bureau seems to believe that the federal government is very involved and might pull our federal funding if we, retreat from Common Core. So there's a miscommunication somewhere. And so, again, who do we believe here? Well, I don't know. I would believe the money, and the money right now is attached to Common Core and doing the Common Core mandates. So let's get back to this idea of local control. That's my last target. Because in the history of American education, I know a lot of folks don't. Right at this point, local control sounds really good to people, right? Wow, I would sure like to be in control of the school that my child is attending. But the problem, well, there are several of them, that the history of local control in the United States has basically meant union control. Because, so for example, and I know that Bill can out-talk anybody on this, but what that basically means is elections that are held in the spring, not in the fall, with the rest of the elections. So only the people who really care about, the schools, and that's usually the teachers and their friends. And I like teachers. I hope to be a teacher again someday, and I have been a teacher and so forth. But you have to realize, and of course, a teacher wants the same thing that every single person wants, higher pay and less work. So there needs to be somebody out there saying, okay, I would love to pay you a lot of money, but I need, their kids to be learning a lot in return, which is pretty fair, in I think most people's eyes. Anyway, so what, and with the federal government and with states taking more and more things away from local boards, they just become another rubber stamp, for what the folks at the top and their little organizations are telling them, a good school board presents a unified front. If you have a dissenter on the board, you make them agree with what the rest of the boards say. I mean, this is what they literally tell new school board members at school board orientations, across the country. If you disagree with something that your school board did, you can't talk about it to anybody. That's not professional. Okay, well, I don't know, oh, I thought there was such a thing called free speech. I don't know. So we basically, the failure of local control has led to this testing accountability regime because local people were not protecting their interests and watching out for their schools. Look, I've talked to parents. Once their kid is out of school, they don't pay attention to local politics if they have ever paid attention to local school politics in the first place. That's not a very good system for civic engagement. So that's why in my mind I still come back to, I think the most prime unit of local control is parent control. Where a parent doesn't have to negotiate with the parents of 5,000 other kids to get their child into an advanced math program because they're the only ones speaking up about it. And that's what happens with current school boards. I have parents coming to me all the time saying, they tested my child psychologically without asking me and I complained about this and, everyone brushed me off. Oh, we, do that all the time. Or there's this dad I've been talking to in a very nice suburb of Chicago. His school principal, his son is 10 years old. And every Tuesday, the lights are out at his child's school to bring concern about the environment to all the K through 5th graders in the school. And he cannot get them to turn the lights on, and he's afraid that the children are going to bump into each other in the dark. They have to read by the light of the windows. And this dad has been to every school board meeting. He's talked to everyone he can think of. Nobody's listening to him. Don't tell me that's local control, because this dad would like his son to have a 5th of his school year back. So that's why I support school choice, and I think that is the second trend, basically, that may offer an option for families if they want to actually opt out, but that actually needs to be a real choice for them. School choice, I'm concerned, is not real school choice if the tests that schools have to administer in order to get a voucher are pushing a progressive pedagogy on teachers. If they are requiring schools, to hire certified teachers that have been indoctrinated in leftist groupthink, and so on and so forth. So if you talk about giving parents power, trusting local, parents to say, I know what's best for my child and I'm going to take them somewhere, then you actually have to trust them rather than pretending you trust them and using the whole setup as a way to control all of the schools, not just the one that 90% of children attend. And I think I've yacked long enough, so I will let Jane finish off.